Good afternoon, guys. Here's another ATR. I wanted to teach you guys how to check for a misfire. So we're going to look at ignition coil, injector diagram, injector circuit, ignition coil circuit, and how you can test this with just a simple back probe on top, either the injector or on top of the ignition coil. So I'm going to kind of change, show you how to do the fundamentals first. This is like maybe a Ford ignition coil where you only have the two wires, the primary side and the voltage side. So if you go to your power's coming out here and you have your signal from the PCM or ignition module or anything like that coming through here. So you're going to get a spark plug, then the coil, and then your voltage from your coil pack or wherever you're going to come from. Just remember, you got to complete the circuit. So when you hit ground on this, your coil makes a magnet field. So when you have a magnet field, it produces voltage outside that coil. And then this is how you can test. Now remember, it's only to see if we got a signal, and you can actually check the spark plugs this way too. You can do one at a time instead of using a secondary kit to where you do all 8. To me, I find it easier just to do one at a time. So when we supply the ground from the PCM going on top of the coil, it's going to produce this magnetic field, which is going to go into your back probe on your scope to where you can actually see the magnetic field or the coil or the ignition pattern. Same with a transistor type coil. You're going to have a square wave signal going in, which is going to induce the voltage to the coil, which is going to come outside. You won't be able to see it, but a scope pattern will be able to pick it up pretty much immediately. And then you're going to have it go in here. Now, if we look at an injector, it has the same thing. It's going in, coming out, and then the coil, the PCM supplies the ground, which makes a magnetic field of the injector, which pulls up the pintle to allow the spray of fuel. So this is just the kind of test to see, okay, do we have injector pulse? Do we have ignition coil? To see if your PCM's operating, or to see if that coil or injector is firing. So what we're going to do is, I have a Volkswagen Jetta here. We're going to start it up. I'm going to disconnect the coil on one. I'm also going to disconnect a injector on another one. And we're going to just find out which one it is. Okay, first thing we want to do is we're going to place our one trigger. You can see one trigger here. You can see, yep. Trigger here to number 1, and we're going to put our ground on the black onto a known good ground. So I'm just going to go right here. Here's the battery. So I'm going to hit the ground here on the ground. The second one is either going to go right on top of the coil or right beside the injector. You can see I am just laying it against the coil and the injector. Right on top of the coil or right beside the injector. This is when I use a 2-channel. There's going to be a lot of times where you have to set up your voltage. I would always start probably, start with a 20-volt scale for ignition, a 1-volt scale for injector coil. So you can see we got everything up. And then now we're just going to go to set our probe. Right on top of this ignition coil. We want to make sure our trigger is on here. Now you can see that we don't really have that good of a pattern, but you can kind of see it there. So what we need to do is set our scale up, or even closer to maybe 2 volts. We want to bring our trigger down to where we can see the pattern. So we're at 2 volts and a 50 milliseconds on this Volkswagen. So here's So you can see here, this is our spark plug. Now if we want to make this further out and get a closer view, we're just going to take this and then bring this to a 20 milliseconds. So now you can actually see the coil really good. So we know that this one here is firing, so now we go to the next coil and lay it right on top of this one. Now you can see this coil is firing. So it looks good here. So we know we have our spark, we have our ignition coil, so now we move to the next one. Okay, so now we see we don't have any kind of ignition coil. Come back in. So I'm just going to take it and push it back in. And look at that, there's our coil pattern. So now we have our coil pattern at number 3. So this is how easy you can do just by checking the coil, you know, one thing at a time, so we can see that our coil's there and our pattern is coming right up to us. So this is an easy way to test our coil without really going into detail of what we have. So we can see that now we have our coil pattern. So now we're going to see about our injector. So we're going to see about firing our injector at the same time. So remember that everything makes a magnetic field. When it makes that magnetic field is the voltage that you're seeing. So this is why we have our pattern here that shows, okay, now we have our ignition. So now let's get to the injector side of it. And we're just going to put it along the magnet side. And you can see it's right along the coil there. So there's our pulse. You know, we have that signal. As you see, you have your injector pulse. Now you see I'm just going along the side of the magnetic coil of the injector. I'm not even back probing the ignition, or I'm not back probing anything. I'm just looking to see that this is firing, so I know that the injector in the computer is doing its work. So now we're going to go to the number 2. We are going to take our second back probe and then go right along the coil, just like what we did on the other one. Set for 2 volts, 50 milliseconds. We'll set our trigger to number 2 this time and bring this down. And then here's your pulse. And then there's your coil. So let's switch this to 500 milliseconds. So you see your spark, and then you see your injector pulse. So you see your spark, and then you also see your injector pulse. So you know both of them are working. So this is an easy way. This is an easy way to tell if your ignition coil is working or your injector is working, just by back probing on top of the coil or back probing on top of the injector, because it makes that winding, which makes a magnetic field, which your back probe would feel, just like a secondary on top of a coil. It's going to feel the pulse, and it's going to put it out onto your scope. This is why scopes are very important when it comes to diagnosing cars, because it could take you, pull a spark plug out, you know, check the coil, pull the spark plug, switch the coil out. You know, it's going to take you a half hour to where you can just lay this on top of the coil and you'll actually get your pattern like you see here. To recap everything: power, pulse, coil. Coil, magnetic field. Brings a magnetic field. Pulse, power, ground, This one has a transistor built inside, so it's got its driver inside of the unit itself, but it still produces a magnetic field, which is part of your spark. So you're going to be able to see it through there. Injector, coil, ground, signal, pulse. It makes that field, and you're able to see it through your back probe. So hopefully you guys like this, and this is just an easier way to say, okay, I got a miss. Let me go to the coil. Oh, look at that, I got a spark. Let me go to the injector pulse. Hey, I got my pattern. It might be a PC. So then you just test it a little bit further, and you go from there. Or a bad engine or something like that. Could be still a fuel injector, not getting fuel, but your electronic side of it, you're gonna know what it is. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Made a simple way to do ignition and injector pulse at the same time. Thank you. I want to thank you all for watching my YouTube channel. Hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you so much. Bye.